has a bunch of duplicate rows because of the way we set up our scraper. So I wanted to fix that really quick. There's a lot of cool ways to do it in SQL. They're kind of crafty. There's some ways to do it in SQL Alchemy, but I'm just going to, it's a one-time thing. Let's just do it like kind of the long way, I guess. So we want to do db session query db URL, and we can say with entities db URL ID db URL all. And so this will be all URLs. So let's just take a peek. Okay, so yeah, so just gave it an order. That's cool. So now what we should do is say for URL in all URLs. It's actually, let's call it a row in all URLs. Let's get a little, we'll say duplicates. There might be a really faster or a better way to do this, but this is just easy. It's really easy to follow what's happening. So we're going to have a set of duplicates and a set of distinct, I guess. And then for row in all URLs, so I had to rethink it really quick. So if it's row.url in known URL, we're going to say duplicates add row ID. We need to check the URLs, not the IDs, because the IDs are all unique. And then if the row.url is not in known URL, then we can add it row.url. Let's see if this works. I mean, obviously we could have just gotten this by calling distinct up here. That's an option, or even just, you know, there's ways to do it, but let's just do this. Okay, so that makes sense. So pretty much we need to delete everything out of the database that has that that one of the IDs here. Okay, so I would normally be a lot more careful, but I'm kind of just not too worried about it. We could always rerun the scrape if need be. So what I think we should do is, let's just say that this is the to delete, and then db session query db url.id.filter db db.url.id, and then it's that in, and we provide it our iterable to delete. So I think that's, let's just see what this is. Rows to delete all. Okay, that's matching up. So I think all we do is say and we need to say synchronized session is false. Or I didn't quite understand the difference between the three. Let's just say false, and then we get this. Uh-oh. Is it a for recipe? Oh, we're deleting from URL, right? So now let's say db session rollback. That's where that comes in handy. Now just to double check that nothing actually did get deleted, let's call that query again. And then len of all URLs. That is, I think, the same number from before. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is because let's see what this was. 1069. Yeah, so nothing got deleted, so we're good. What we need to be doing instead of this is recipe, and it's going to be URL ID. So query recipe. Delete them all out of there first. Yeah. And then delete them out of URL. Again, there might have been a lot better way to go about this, more Pythonic or whatever. I just needed it done, so just did it. URL ID, and did it go? Yep, and then let's say commit. All right, great. Now let's just jump into this to verify. We're in here. We can just say select count from recipe 960. Beautiful. And then let's also go with select count distinct URL from URL. Yeah. $977. Cool. So we got rid of all of our duplicates. We have our database all figured out. Like we don't have any more duplicates. We want to prevent any more duplicates from getting in there. So we basically need to add in some logic to these functions, or yeah, to one of these functions that prevents that from happening. So first of all, let's read in all of the known URLs. And let's just make it a set off right off the bat. So it's going to be basically, let's start with saying session.query db session, db query, db URL, and then all. Okay, so there's all of the known URLs. And then add to this list, it's going to read in everything that we have already. And as we iterate through the post items, if we'll add to it, or we'll check to see if it's already in there. So URL equals this, and say if URL in known URLs. Continue to the next post item. Yeah. Pass it into this function. Known URLs. Okay. And then we will append it to the URL list. that is being tracked here, but additionally we'll say known URLs dot add, and we'll add the URL, so the URL. I noticed that in this file there was the same problem that we found here when I was naming it recipe, and then I changed it to new record because we already have something called recipe, which is our JSON. Didn't realize it was happening here. So it worked, but I don't want to get confused when I come back and read this. So let's give this the same form as that other function. That way, coming back and looking at both functions side by side, or both files, it'll be pretty obvious. New record. That way URL is dedicated to that. Known, and then known URLs gets added to known URLs, and the new record gets added to new record. And then add all new records. Okay, that's better. So let's add in some more stuff though. DB session at all. Why don't we get like a new URL counter equals 0. And then here, let's say new URL counter, increment it by however many we return from get URLs, which is going to be return len of new records. Yeah. Just like that. And then what we can do is say counter, just after this is all said and done, saved new URL counter new URLs from just like that. Okay, so now when we run it, it's going to get all the URLs that are in the database and only insert new ones, and then let us know how many it inserted. So why don't we actually run it and see how it goes, because it's been a few days since I've ran it, so maybe they've added more recipes. One thing, this has to say row URL for row in. So it's going through each page. So we're going through all the amazing grains. Looks like it picked one up. We have 4 new ones. They were kind of printing out as we went through. So this one, so we can see what it inserted into the database. There's really no need to go to the database to check it when we can just check it from here. And so this is one that is new to us. We didn't get it last time we scraped, and it was inserted today, or they added this today. So now we're at the point where we can run this on a regular basis, and it's only going to get new stuff. Now what we need to do is come over here and something similar, I guess you could say, where instead of getting all the URLs and scraping all of every single one, we're going to want to only get URLs that haven't been scraped yet. And so what that's going to look like is, just to make it easy, we're just going to use SQL Alchemy to insert or to run a SQL query because it's kind of easy to do in SQL. I don't want to do it, go and try and figure out how to do it in SQL Alchemy. So let's create a variable and let's call it select, and it's going to be let's, instead of using star, let's list it out because it'll might help when we look at this later. From URL where ID not in, and then we'll do a subquery select URL ID from recipe. I think that's right. It's going to select all the URL IDs from recipe and then select the IDs, select everything out of URL where, select everything out of URL where the ID is not already present in this table. So that's our select statement. And then what we need to do is say with db, so we have this engine. So this is kind of getting away from the ORM concept, but that's okay. So db engine.connect. I think it's convention to say as con. I don't think we actually need to use that, but let's just stick with it. And then let's say URLs, because that's what we named it. URLs equals row for row in engine. Engine.execute. And then we have to use this text function. There's a lot of options there. Import text. Okay, sure. What's wrong with you? db.engine. I think this is the problem. I don't think I picked the right text. It execute text, and let me just type it in the way I got it from the documentation, because that was different. It was actually, I guess we could just say SQL alchemy.text, not uppercase text. That was the minor but very important difference, apparently. So let's see if it works now. So still not happy. Select ID URL name. Recipe name. Which, yeah. Okay, now it's running. Shouldn't be that long because it's only scraping. It should be only scraping the first 4. So kind of ran through a lot. I think, yeah, there's all these problematic ones that never got scraped. So it's going to hit those every time. So that would be kind of cool. Now that it's run, we could actually do another thing where we remove all of them. So let's make a dedicated function. Let's call it clear unscrapable URLs. And it's essentially, we're going to call it from within run so we have access to select. And so it's going to be with db engine. I already have something on my clipboard, so I'm just going to type this out. Connect as con. Again, really don't need that. URLs equals, what's on my clipboard? That. Okay, probably could remember that. So it's the same query, right? Because it just is. So URLs equals, I guess we don't have access. So we'll bring the select string down into this function, and then as above, run it with db.engine and populate this URLs list, and then iterate through the list and call delete on each row individually. db session query QURY db URL dot filter db URL dot id equal to row id dot delete. So, and then I just want to say print yeah. I think that makes sense. And we don't need that synchronized for single deletes. And then we'll say db session commit. Okay. And that's all contained. We don't need to pass it anything. We have a special select, even though it's exactly the same. That's no problem. Get all the rows. Delete it row by row. Print it row by row, and then do the commit. Okay. So clear unscrapable URLs. Let's get rid of that. Okay. Run it. Deleted from URL table. Deleted from URL table. Okay, cool. Now, when we run this again, it shouldn't do anything. Good. That's just the standard stuff for db.py. Awesome. Cool. So now anytime this gets one of those weird ones, if it can't be scraped, it will take it out of this table for us. And now, of course, I'm thinking the better option would be to not remove them, but flag them somehow, so that they don't so that we don't try to scrape them every time. Because as it stands now, when we go to run URL scraper, it will pick up those bad URLs again and try to scrape them again. Not a huge deal, but it might have been cool to, instead of remove them, flag them as bad and then not try to scrape them ever again. But this will work for now. So that's it for this video. I think the last thing we want to do here is create one function that calls both URL scraper and recipe scraper and does some logging. That'll be next.